Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and I am going to show you how to paint this mountain morning fall landscape with acrylics on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. The first thing I'm going to do for this landscape painting is measure 4 inches up from the bottom of the canvas, and that's going to be my horizon line. So the horizon line in this painting is pretty much the baseline of the mountain. And then I'm going to use a T-square ruler to draw that horizontal line. So I made the 3 marks at the 4 inch mark, and I used the T-square to make the horizontal line. So now we have our painting divided, and everything below that line is going to be pretty much water, and then above the line is going to be the sky and the mountain. Next, I'm going to load my palette with Cerulean Blue and Titanium White. You'll need about equal amounts. I'm going to use what is called a 3/4 inch wash brush, and I'm going to dip it in the water and pat it dry. I'm going to load my brush in about equal amounts of the blue and the white, so about a 1-to-1 proportion, and I'm going to mix the two together on the palette, and it's going to create a lighter blue. This is going to be the blue that we're going to start with at the top of the sky. When I do skies in pretty much all my paintings, I start at the top, and then it's slightly darker at the top, and then it gets slightly lighter towards the bottom. So I'm going to do what I like to call X strokes. It means that I'm not painting all the way across the canvas. I'm taking my brush and I'm pretty much like painting the letter X. And when you do that, when you flip-flop your brush in that fashion, your blue and white will kind of blend together and create kind of this texture in the sky, so it's not just a solid color. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the pure cerulean blue that was mixed with the white, but then we're going to gradually add in some more white and work our way towards the horizon line and gradually add a little bit more white in there so it gets slightly lighter. Now know that a lot of this sky is going to be covered in mountain anyway, but adding that just subtle difference in the blue is going to give it a nice effect. Now I'm speeding this video up just a little bit here because this portion takes quite a bit of time, but it's super easy and you can't mess this up because we're only using 2 colors and we're just flip-flopping our brush, creating a nice texture in the sky with the blue and the white. Ideally you want your sky to be a little bit lighter towards the bottom and more of the pure blue at the top. You can also paint the sides of your canvas. And so I'm just going back in there with a little bit of white and kind of brushing it upwards, and maybe they're just high clouds in the sky, or we don't know. So yes, we can definitely paint the sides of the canvas. So I like to use whatever colors are still left on my canvas for this step, and then I'll just drag the color to the side. So this is just the blue and the white, and at the top maybe it's just going to be that pure form of blue so that it matches. We are going to paint the water next, and the water was done with the same 2 colors, so cerulean blue and titanium white. I didn't even rinse my brush off, and I grabbed the cerulean blue, just the cerulean, and I'm going to start at the horizon line, so just under the horizon line, and I'm going to use the tip of my brush to kind of define that line. And the difference with this water is we're going left and right horizontal strokes versus the sky we did different kind of strokes, so it's going to create the effect that it looks more like water even though we're using the same 2 colors. So also it's going to start out pure cerulean blue, and it's going to get lighter as we work our way down, just like what we did in the sky. So use that tip of the brush to really define that line. And honestly, if your line is not straight, it's okay, because there's a whole bunch of shrubbery that's going to be right there, and it's going to be hiding any wiggly, not straight line in there. So try to make it as straight as possible, but if it's not perfect, it's fine. And so that's the cerulean part. And then when you work your way down towards the middle of the water, we're going to start adding a little bit more white to the brush. So we want to get the white to blend to a lighter blue, and it just blends on the canvas. So take that white just a teeny bit on the tip of the brush, just to get it to blend very gently. That white can take over fast, so if you add a whole glob of white on your brush, it's not going to work as gracefully, versus if you add just a teeny bit to the tip and gradually paint it in there. And I'm doing full strokes all the way across the canvas. I'm not stopping in the middle, I'm going all the way across. I'm using the full width of my brush, and I'm brushing it. And it's okay if it doesn't perfectly blend. So if you have some darker streaks of blue in there, that's fine. Or if you even have a few bright white streaks in there, that's okay too. And we're going to go all the way down. Even though there's a piece of land on the bottom of our painting, we're not going to worry about where that's going to be right now. We're just painting the water all the way down. And you see me painting the sides of the canvas, so same thing, add the cerulean blue on the sides. So basically all four sides of this painting are cerulean blue. The next thing we're going to do is draw the mountains. Now you want to make sure that your sky is dry. Mine dried very fast because it was a very thin layer of paint. Although you can get a hairdryer and dry yours real quick, or wait for it to dry and come back. I used a piece of chalk to draw these mountains. Start on the left and create your first peak. This one's going to be the highest peak. So I'm going to pretty much like I'm drawing a triangle. I'm not going to go all the way to the top of the sky. In fact, there's about 3 fingers of space right there from the point to the edge of the canvas. And I'm going to go down, but I'm not going to go all the way down. I'm going to kind of go up and make another peak and kind of come down. This next peak is kind of behind the first one, a little bit shorter than the first one. And I'm going to go down, and then I'm going to make a third peak over there on the right. So when you have the chalk, you can erase it until you kind of get the pattern or design that you want with the mountains. So I'm making mine just a little bit darker. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the center part of the mountains. So this line is actually going to divide the dark and the light side of the mountain. This first line kind of goes down, and then it zigzags, and then it turns, and it kind of goes left. This next line in the middle kind of curves down, and then the line over here on the right, I'm going to make it kind of go diagonally towards the right. And then I'm just going to kind of go over this and press kind of harder to sort of define my mountain until I'm happy with the way that it looks. And we can always adjust it when we start painting it in. I'm going to load the colors that I'm going to use for the mountain onto my palette. So I am going to use Mars Black, Titanium White, and also a little bit of Cerulean Blue. On my palette, I'm going to make a light color. So this brush that I'm using is a 12 bright brush. It's a smaller flat brush. So I'm going to grab a glob of white and just a tiny bit of black on the corner so that we make a light gray. And then I'm going to grab a tiny bit of cerulean blue on the corner so we make a light blue gray. So I'd say about 5 parts white, 1 part black, 1 part blue. With my 12 bright brush, I have a big glob of that light grayish blue color, and everything on the right side of the mountain is going to be painted that color. So, my camera angle is not the greatest angle right here, so I do apologize, but I am painting everything in a diagonal fashion over here. So everything is going diagonally, and you can see that my color is kind of varied right there because I didn't mix it all the way on the palette, and that was actually okay because I like the look of the streak of black in there. So if you wanted yours to be kind of having a streak of black, you can add a teeny tiny bit of black to your corner if you want that to happen. So what I'm doing with the brush, I'm using the full width of the brush, I'm painting diagonally, and everything on this, just the right side. I don't want to paint on the left side of the line because that's for darker colors. This is the lighter side of the mountain, so I'm doing diagonal strokes. And then when you get to the base of the mountain, you can kind of curve your strokes so it kind of curves down into the sort of valley that's at the base of the mountain. Okay, and if you want to continue to sort of vary that, you can see that I added a little bit more white to that mixture. And because if everything was all solid same color, we wouldn't have this pretty texture in there. So not mixing your colors all the way is giving it this nice effect. And so I'm doing the same thing over here. This one's a little bit lighter because I added more white to my brush this time. But same technique, I'm painting diagonally and it's going down. And then when you get to the base of the mountain, you can kind of curve your stroke a little bit. And this peak over here in the right is going to be that color as well. So the nice thing about the fact that the background is blue is that if we have a little bit of blue still showing through, that's okay. These mountains are far in the distance, and having that sort of hint of blue in there gives it that sense of far awayness. I can't think of that word. Things that are further away, landscape perspective. When things are further away, they're kind of dim and sort of almost sometimes match the color of the sky. So don't try to, it's okay if we still have some of that blue showing through. You don't have to cover it all the way. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to make a darker version of that gray, and I'm actually going to introduce water into this because my brush got super dry. But that water, when you add the bit of water to your brush, it's definitely going to make it a solid color, and that's okay. It worked out that way. But I basically took that color that was already on my palette and added a little bit more black in there, and I'm going to paint the left side of the mountain, and my stroke is going to go in the opposite direction. And because we're going in the opposite direction, it's going to create that really cool effect of it's going to look like a mountain. So I went ahead and added some more Cerulean Blue into that mix because I really like adding that blue in there. It gives it that bluish gray look, and going in there, and it also gives it some color variation. But I don't know, bad camera angle here, but I'm using the tip of my brush to really sort of define that line. There's that line that divides the dark and the light. So really define it with the tip of your brush like you're outlining it. There we go. You can see what I'm doing there. And when you go down, just kind of let it sort of fade and curve out. And so we're going to do the same thing to the left side of this mountain as well. The left side right here is pretty easy because it's pretty much all solid color. We're not really doing texture or much color variation in here. We will go back in and do a little bit of texture, but for now, super easy. Just paint it solid, that dark gray color. So speaking of texture, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of swipe my brush on the palette because there's a lot of paint on it, and if you just swipe it on the palette, it kind of gets the excess paint off. I'm going to dip the tip of my brush in some white, and you can do this dry brush style by like wiping it off, but instead of wiping it off, I'm just kind of swiping it on the palette so it's not overloaded. And just on the tip of my brush, I'm going to add the white, and I'm just going to paint some short strokes that are going kind of diagonally and kind of curved, and this is going to add some texture to the dark side of the mountain. So really short strokes, using the full width of my brush. I know my hand is covering right there, I'm so sorry. But just short strokes, adding a little bit of texture. Your goal is not to make that dark lighter. Your goal is just to add a few strokes of white in there to create some mountain texture. And then I'm going to do the same thing but opposite on the white. So swiping my brush out, adding a little bit of black to my brush, and doing short little strokes that are going diagonally, and it's going to add some darker texture into the white part of the mountain. And your goal is not to make that lighter part look darker. It still needs to be the brightest side of the mountain, but adding those few strokes of sort of gray in there gives it that mountain texture. If you go to my website, if you're watching this on YouTube, click on the link to go to my website, and I have a tutorial on how to do these kind of mountains. So it's dedicated just to these mountains. It goes much more in depth about how to do this, so you can kind of practice your mountains first on some mixed media paper until you feel sort of confident with it for this painting. That is something that you can do if you feel like you're really struggling with these mountains. And so what I did is I'm wiping my brush off. I don't want to rinse it because I don't want to introduce water in here. I wiped my brush off and I added just some titanium white. And I'm going to add white just so there's that line right there, just on the edge of that line. Of course, we want the white to show up on the right side. But here, I'll hold my canvas this way so you can see. So there we go. The tip of my brush with just the white, and I'm kind of just dragging it right there on the edge. And of course, because it's dry brush, it's going to run out really fast and get really dry. So I'm holding this brush very lightly, and I'm just dragging it right there where that edge is, and I'm just kind of dragging it downwards. Diagonally. It gives that edge of the mountain its sort of brightest part. Maybe the light is hitting that part right there. And same thing with this mountain peak over here on the right. Same thing. And I just use the tip of my brush to kind of outline that line right there. And so I forgot to do my texture thing on this one earlier, so I'm going back and doing that texture thing with it. I did it with just the darker color in there. And then I'm going to take that darker color, maybe add a few little strokes of that darker color. Not very many, just a few in there, kind of towards the bottom area. So you can keep kind of going in there and adding more texture and rendering the mountains, but we're going to stop here and not go too much more into detail because we have a lot of other things to do in this painting. We have the trees and the bottom land and everything else, so our mountains don't technically have to be super detailed. I am rinsing all of that gray and white and black off of my brush. I am still going to use this brush for the next step. On my palette, I have Deep Green Permanent and Mars Black. That green magically appeared there. It actually got cut off from my video. But you're going to mix about 1 part black to about 2 parts green, 2 or 3 parts green to make a very dark green. Use that 12 bright brush to paint a land area, and it's going to cover the base of the mountain. It's going to be above the water, so don't paint below the water. Paint a wiggly line right there above that line. and then paint it in solid. So this is the base coat of that land area that is pretty much at the base of the mountain, and it's an uneven line, so you can make it higher if you want to. Mine is relatively the same high, although it kind of gets higher on the right. And so you're just painting it in solid. Next, I'm going to wipe my brush off, and I'm going to load some burnt umber onto my palette. We're going to use that same brush, didn't rinse it off, so there might be a little bit of green there, and that's okay. But this bottom land area is going to be larger, kind of a larger space than the back one, but still a bumpy, uneven line, and it kind of dips down in the middle. But I'm going to paint that a solid color as well. So we basically just defined our two land areas of this painting. I'm going to take this a step further and decide to paint the sides of the canvas. I know we already painted it blue, but I'm going to extend that downwards with the brown. Okay, and then so we have the base layer of our land, and we're going to kind of build on that and add some more color in there. And because it's a fall painting, we're going to add some colors in there. This is light olive green and cadmium yellow hue medium. I rinsed my 12 bright brush, and I'm going to double load it in that green and yellow. And so I guess more green than yellow at this point. And I'm just going to kind of tap my brush, making expressive, sort of abstract looking strokes. And it's not going to be super opaque because that olive green is a pretty translucent color. But it's going to give you some color variation in that land that's way in the distance. So again, just short little strokes, a little bit of yellow in there if you want. Later on, we'll add a little bit more fall colors in there. But for now, just tapping it, creating some color variation. And even if you go a little bit over the water, just a tiny bit over the water, that's fine. So your land doesn't have to be perfectly straight. It's a bunch of shrubbery, perhaps they're trees way in the distance. So I'm just going to keep tapping my brush, creating that texture with the olive green and the yellow. If you wanted it to look more yellow, you can add more yellow to it. Next, I'm going to load my palette with Cadmium Red Hue Medium. I'm not going to rinse my brush. I'm just going to kind of wipe that green off on the palette a bit. Mix some red and yellow and maybe that little bit of green together to create this reddish color. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did in the land way in the distance to the land here on the ground. So that same sort of texture, short strokes going different angles to create some color variation in the ground, some texture, so that it's not a solid brown. It's a fall painting, so we have that reddish color in there on the ground. Maybe the leaves have fallen down. So I'm just going to keep layering on that color. Again, it's very abstract right now, so don't worry about making it look real. Then we are going to do the reflection in the water. So there's two layers of reflection in this water. There's kind of a darker layer of the green land kind of reflecting in the water, and then we have the white reflection lines in the water. So instead of rinsing my brush, I'm going to dry it off with a paper towel. I'm going to load it in that dark green, so that deep green permanent mixed with a little bit of brown and maybe a little bit of black just to make it super dark. Wipe it off with your brush because this is dry brush style. We're going to use the full width of the brush and we're going to drag it downwards. So my brush is dried and I'm dragging it down from the land down into the water, and it should be see-through because it's dry brush. You should see the water below it. And if you need to keep wiping your brush off to get it even more dry, do that, but absolutely no water on the brush whatsoever because this is dry brush. And I could even turn my brush vertically like this so my bristles are making sort of the line instead of the shape. And so just dragging it down, create some variation in there. Some of the reflection is not going as deep into the water. Some of it is going very much down. And variation in color too. So you can grab some of that olive green. You can even grab some of that yellow and just dragging it down. It doesn't have to have any, like, it doesn't have to look like a tree or anything like that. It's just color being reflected into the water. And you could even kind of tap your brush right there where that line is so that that's sort of where that land is, and then the reflections going down, and just have some fun and create some variety. It doesn't have to all look the same, and you can even drag it down a little bit further into this. We are not going to make the mountain reflect into the water because that would get kind of tricky in this painting, but so that's my reflection, and this should dry really fast because it's dry brush. If it's not, get a blow dryer to dry it really quick because we're going to do the white lines next, and this creates a really cool layering effect with the water. So I'm going to switch my brush to a number 0 round brush. This is a tiny round brush, and I'm going to use titanium white. I am painting horizontal lines that are going over that reflection that I painted. Way in the distance, my lines are ideally shorter, not as wider, and more dense and closer together. And then my lines closer to the bottom of the painting where that brown red line land is, the lines are wider and further apart. So that'll create a sense of depth in your water. And don't stress too much about these water lines. I always stress when it's time to do reflection lines. I freak out about these white lines and trying to make them perfectly horizontal, and really it doesn't have to be that way. It could be water moves and it's not still, so our lines, it's okay if they go kind of slanted in some areas, and it's okay if it's not perfect, but it does, what's happening is it's creating this really pretty effect in the water. It kind of makes it look like crystal clear water with the reflection, but then we have the lines that are covering the reflection, so that makes it look really pretty. And so just keep doing as many lines as you want. You can stop here, or you can continue to go. I wouldn't do too many because it would kind of look a little bit busy. And not all the lines are the same width. Some of the lines that are closer to the bottom are really tiny and shorter, and then we have some longer lines way in the distance. So it's another one of those variety elements. When you do the painting, you add different variety of lines to give it that more of an interesting look, versus if it was all the same, it wouldn't look as natural. Okay. So we're done with the reflection part, and I'm going to add another layer of color over here on the land, some brighter colors in there, added more yellow, and I wanted to kind of make my land a little bit higher. Now that I know I'm done with the water, that I can take this land and I can bring it up higher if I want to, and because I know I don't have to work on that water anymore. So that's what I did there. And then I'm taking sort of those warm colors and adding a little bit in the distance. Maybe there's a few pops of warm colors way back there. And if you look at the final result of the painting, I ended up adding a bunch more yellow in there later on. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to add kind of another level of land. I'm going to make this very abstract, and actually this is kind of optional. You don't have to do this. It really doesn't make that much of a difference in the painting, but I wanted these trees, the pine trees, to be situated on sort of a rocky area. So I'm going to double load my 12 bright brush in black and white. I'm going to do this abstract, so I'm just going to flip-flop my brush with these short strokes that I've been doing with all the other part of the land, and I'm just going to create this land area at the bottom to represent kind of a rocky area, and maybe use a little bit more black in there to sort of define that shape. And that is where my one pine tree that I'm going to paint is going to be situated on. And then I'm going to add a little bit more black on the bottom, kind of stretch this out a little bit. Maybe it's kind of shadowy on the bottom ground area over here. The next step that we're going to do after this is paint the aspen tree. So you want to make sure that you rinse all of that black off of your 12 bright brush. You want to freshen up some titanium white on your palette, and we're going to paint the first trunk of the tree. I'm holding my brush vertically. I know you didn't see that based on this camera angle, but I'm holding my brush vertically. Making the base of the tree wider at the bottom, so it's probably about 3/4 of an inch at the bottom, and our trunk gets thinner as we go up. So a wide trunk, it gets thinner, and to make that thinner stroke, you turn your brush on its side vertically and kind of let go of the pressure. So you're holding the brush very lightly to create those vertical strokes. So my second tree trunk is going sort of diagonally, so it's not perfectly vertical in the painting. The left one is probably more vertical, the right one's kind of slanted, and what I'm doing here is, so the sides of my trees, it's not like a perfect rectangle shape, it's kind of wobbly. So to make it, give it that more natural look, we kind of wobble the sides of it. To create your branch here, I know that got cut off right there on the top, but use the tip of your brush on its side to create that thinner branch. So I have my brush angled on its side there. If you don't feel comfortable doing these smaller branches with that 12 bright, grab a smaller brush or a round brush. Nobody says that you have to use this brush for this kind of tree. You can use a lot of different brushes to achieve the same effect. So if this brush isn't having it for you, grab your small round brush and do your smaller branches with that. I just didn't, because I'm using this brush because I can change sort of the angle to create different size of branches. And so I'm going back and adding a second coat in there. This titanium white needs to be super opaque, so several coats to get it nice and opaque, because it's not a see-through tree. We don't want to see any of the water through it. And I'm going to jump right in here because these leaves are super exciting. We can do these leaves with the 12 bright or the round. I ended up switching to the round brush, so bear with me, but I'm going to do it first with the 12 bright brush. Load your palette with Cad Yellow Medium and a little bit of titanium white, kind of swirl those two colors together. And so to do it with this flat brush, you kind of flip-flop the brush, but we want the strokes to be smaller, so I'm using just the corner of the brush to sort of tap it to create the leaves of the aspen tree. So when you add these leaves, don't worry that every dot needs to have a home. Like, every stroke you do does not need to be attached to a branch of the tree. So you can have floating dots in there that are not attached to any branch, and it'll still create the illusion that there's a whole bunch of yellow leaves in the tree. So you see that I switched to the number 4 round brush, and I like the effect that the round brush creates better because I wanted more of these rounded looking leaves, and I wanted thick strokes. So I'm applying a lot of paint with these leaves. So thick round strokes, and by double loading, meaning that you're dipping your brush in yellow and white, it's creating that color variation in the leaves. So if all the leaves were all the same, I guess, tint of yellow, it wouldn't look realistic or interesting. It would look kind of plain and boring. But if you add white in there and more pure yellow and different tints of yellow in there, it makes it look like the light is hitting the leaves differently, and you can see different colors in there. And adding that texture, so texture is the thicker stroke in there, creates a more interesting, realistic impression of the leaves. And especially since this is kind of a top layer of the painting in here, we want it to be nice and thick and look like it's kind of in the front, closer to the viewer. So with that said, I wanted to add some more yellow looking texture way in the distance. So with my brush, I grabbed the olive green. You can reload some olive green if it dried by now, and some yellow, and just kind of dot some brighter yellow color way in the distance. It kind of creates some balance with that color and the yellow, and then we have some yellowish color kind of in the middle of our painting as well. This is a good part of the painting to take a break, because we are going to do a fan brush tree, and I know a lot of beginner painters get really stressed out with these kind of trees, so take a break and clear your mind and then come back and do this step. So I'm going to use a fan brush. I believe this is a number 4 fan brush. This is a Royal and Langnickel fan brush. And I'm going to do kind of several layers of this fan brush tree, starting with the darkest layer. So I'm going to mix deep green permanent with some black. So it's a very dark green. You want it to be very dark and stand out against any of that dark green that's already in the background. But when you do these fan brush trees, you start at the top and kind of make a mark with the corner of your brush, and then you tap it, kind of going in a zigzag pattern using just the tip of the brush, and you're forming the shape of the tree. So right here at the top, the tree is not that wide, so I'm angling my brush on the side just to get the smaller stroke in there. And as I'm kind of working my way down, then I can use the full width of the fan brush to paint those horizontal strokes going back and forth in a zigzag direction. My tree is going to look very bare here at first, but I'm really focused on getting the shape of the tree down first before I'm worried about making it look nice and bushy and full. So it's kind of like painting the skeleton of the tree first. And so, and also realize that this tree's cut off, so we don't have the full view of the tree. The center part of the tree is very close to the edge of the canvas, so it's not going to be the full tree. It's going to be almost like we're painting 3/4 of the tree. And go all the way down. The bottom of the tree is very wide. And then once you feel comfortable with the skeleton shape of the tree, then you can go back and you can do the same thing again to make it fuller. So you can add, if your tree doesn't have, if it's not that dark looking, if it's not standing out on your painting yet, go back and add some more black into it, and then add that black shadowy layer in there. Really makes it stand out. So another thing is we don't focus on making it completely solid. It's okay if we still see some water and mountain through the tree. Think about trees. You can a lot of times see through them. They're not always completely opaque. When you are okay with that first structure of the tree, I went in, go in with your round brush, and you can create like a little trunk of the tree so you know where that tree is situated on the ground. I just use burnt umber for that. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to create the grass that you see under the birch or aspen trees. I'm going to use my fan brush for this, and I'm just making up a color here. I'm mixing some olive green with some yellow, and maybe some of that dark green in there. So sometimes it's just fun to make up a color when you're painting, mixing colors on the palette. Anyway, so I'm going to use the fan brush to do the grass. I don't typically like to do grass with the fan brush, but I decided to try it here. It's very dry and it doesn't flow very well right here, but I could add a little bit of water to my brush to get it to flow better. But I'm using the brush, kind of angling it different ways, starting from the bottom and kind of stroking upwards. It creates a very thin grass, not very solid. I ended up switching to a different brush here because I didn't really like the effect that it was creating, but I wanted to create some grass that's sticking up from the base of the tree and overlapping some of the water. Different variations of color in there, so grab some more deep green permanent, and notice how I'm holding the fan brush vertically instead of using the full width. You can turn your brush vertically and it creates a thinner stroke. I'll go back later with my number 4 round brush and create some more grass texture in there later. But right now I want to add some brighter red hues into this land area. So with my round brush, I like the effect that the round brush creates with these strokes. Some red and yellow and painting some dots, maybe some more olive green in there. Some dots behind that darker land that we created on the bottom, so not overlapping that land at all, but some brighter areas of land. Make it look like there's leaves on the ground. There's a lot of layering going on in this painting because you remember we started with that base layer. It was just a dark brown and I kept adding more to it, and that's kind of the point with this sort of technique I'm doing, is adding more layers. And if you look at the final results, it actually is a little bit brighter too. I added some brighter yellows later on. So what we're going to do next, you want to make sure that your birch tree is dry. If it's not, get a blow dryer and dry it. We are going to dry brush the black marks on these trees. So I loaded my 12 bright in black, wiped it off with the paper towel. I'm going to use the tip of my brush and I'm going to drag it. It helps that my bristles are kind of frayed on this brush, but by wiping it off with the paper towel and creating that dry brush effect, you only want a tiny bit of paint on your brush. In fact, wipe it off again to create that look, because if there's too much black on my brush, it will not create this effect. And I'm only doing it on the left side of the trunk, and I'm just dragging it. Kind of, if you want your trunk to look kind of 3D-ish, you can curve your stroke a little bit so that it makes kind of a rounded shape. But and you don't really have to be consistent. You can have various areas that are darker and lighter. So another one of that variety thing. And we got cut off there at the top, but I'm pretty much doing the same thing on all of the trunk, and you can even do it to the branches as well. You can go in there and add shorter strokes in there, shorter and darker, longer and darker, so make sure you do that variety. And then we are going to go back with a little bit of white. By adding just a teeny bit of white in there, it kind of makes it look a little bit more gray, and you don't have to do that, but it's just that extra thing. So next, only do this next step if your pine tree is dry. If it's not, either take a break or use a blow dryer to dry it. Load your fan brush in the olive green, just the olive green for now. We're going to go back over our tree and add a second layer in there using the exact same technique. So start at the top, work your way down, and add that lighter green in there. And that's going to create the effect that our tree is lighter. If you look at the final results, it actually ends up being pretty bright. But add that layer of olive green in there. And I freshened up some olive green on my palette there. So the point is to not completely cover all that black all the way. I grabbed some red accidentally, and that actually ended up being okay. So it's kind of a more of a warmer green color, it's okay to mix a little bit of red into your green because it makes it look natural. But that was a happy accident, and it's okay. So if you want to do that too, it looks kind of cool. But anyway, the point is to not cover all of that dark. You want that dark showing through because it's the dark, shadowy, sort of the inside part of the tree. And then to make it super bright, so the top layer of the tree is the brightest, mix some white with light olive green and add some strokes of white in there with your brush. Don't cover it all the way, it's going to look like a snowy tree if you did that, but just a few strokes of that bright green in there gives it that extra highlight on the tree. Our painting is almost finished here. These last steps, all I'm going to be doing is just adding some more details, and I'm not going to be adding any new features, just adding some more details in the grass. So I went back with my fan brush, added some more strokes in there, maybe some darker brown and green in there, and just kind of making sort of a darker area of the grass, so kind of a second layer of the grass. And here's where I switched to the round brush. So this is the number 4 round brush, so I wanted more defined grass strokes. Same technique with the round brush, but it's more controlled, and just adding a second layer of grass in there. And then I don't rinse my brush for this, but I added some more reddish color into the ground area, so another layer in there, maybe some more reddish color way in the distance, some pops of brighter reds in there. And if you even wanted to add a few pops of red in the reflection of the water, if you feel brave, you can do that, but I didn't touch any of the reflection. I did use my 0 round brush to add a little bit of a white highlight to that tree trunk, just a subtle little highlight. And I felt like my aspen tree needed some more brighter leaves, so I did that, some more white in there and more yellow, just a second layer of leaves. Adds extra visual interest, it makes it nice and full. It takes quite a bit of time painting all these dots of leaves, but I love doing it. It's super relaxing. You can just kind of zen out as you paint all these little dots. And just remember to keep a nice variation of color in there with the yellow and the white. I'm actually going to go silent here for just a bit while I finish this, adding the rest of my leaves on this tree. Then I decided to add some more pops of yellow on the ground over here to brighten this area up. And some pops of yellow way in the distance as well. And I know I said I wasn't going to touch the reflection again, but I grabbed my 0 round and did some more reflection lines in there. This is the stage of the painting where you know you're coming to a conclusion, but you still want to add just those few final touches when you take a step back and you kind of think, okay, well, maybe I'll add some more of these white lines in there. I ended up adding a bit more white to my mountains, and I'll show you what I did here in just a second. Also, if there's any chalk still showing, just kind of erase that with a wet paintbrush. But with my 0 round, I really wanted to just define some of the points of these mountains, especially right the top corner of it where that dividing line is. Adding some pops of very pure bright white in there just gives it an extra contrast into the mountains. Again, very small, subtle final touch to the painting. This is just with that 0 round brush, and my painting is coming to its conclusion here. I am going to sign my name at the bottom here as soon as I figure out if I'm done with these mountains or not. I am going to use that Zero round brush and titanium white to sign my name in the lower right hand corner of the painting, and that is the conclusion of how to paint mountain morning fall landscape painting with Tracy Kiernan from Step by Step Painting. Thanks for watching.